All right, hello everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, CJIS Compliance and Digitization. I'm Will Whitney, CEO of BMI, and with me is Richard G, who is our security officer. So he knows all about CJIS and will be the expert along on the ride for this webinar today. Hey, Richard.
Hey, well, glad to be riding shotgun with you.
Yes, of course. All right. Let's go through the purpose of today's webinar, which is one, defining CJIS. It may be a term that you have or have not heard. We'll define that. Describe how it applies to digitization projects specifically, because that's what BMI does. We digitize records, so we want to show you how it does apply. And then it also helps you, the purpose is so you know what to look for when you're researching potential scanning partners, not just them saying something, but them actually understanding what CJIS is and its applicability to your project. But first, before getting to the actual slides, we'll some nuts and bolts, which just helps me make sure that people can see what's going on. So if you can hear me, can you please raise your hand? Perfect. I see some hands going up. And put it back down, then raise it again if you can see the screen that says nuts and bolts. So I can see that, so I know that you can actually see my screen. If you could put your hand up for that and let me know. Okay, perfect. And you are muted, not on video, so don't have to worry about having your camera on or anything like that. You can't speak into your microphone. You'll have to use the chat tool, which I believe on your screen, if you're looking at your own screen, to the right or wherever you have the Zoom like panel, there should be a little chat tool. Feel free to ask questions along the way. If I see them, I'll try to answer them as they come along. If I don't see them, we have time at the end for questions, so we'll get to those at the end no matter what. With that said, let's go straight into the first topic, which is what is CJIS? That's a simple way to say it, but it stands for Criminal Justice Information Services. And that is a division of the FBI. So it's a federal organization. And basically, a high level nutshell, they aggregate and organize CJI, which is criminal justice information. And it's basically a national database for law enforcement agencies, not just the feds, but local, state, local, etc., other law enforcement agencies to utilize information, cross country. And the best example that I like to think of is, I'm sure folks watch Netflix or watch these documentaries, and you look at all like serial killer shows from documentaries about serial killers in, let's say, the 70s, and you go, all right, this guy, someone's murdering all these people here, someone's murdering people there, and then these departments, they don't have the accessibility to pass information to each other, so these people keep getting away with it. Now it is a lot more difficult, of course, but you're wondering, well, how do they not share this information? Was there not a way for these people to share, the different agencies to share information? That's kind of how I like to think of CJIS, that if you're following the security policy, which we'll go into a little bit, you will have access to this national database, so law enforcement agencies across the country can utilize each other's information to help out with cases and things of that sort. So that's how I like to look at it, just kind of a layman's perspective. Richard, do you want to add anything to this about just the generalities of CJIS?
Yeah, because there's so many departments, agencies, states involved. It's just a minimum standard which the FBI publishes, in which everyone having access to this data needs to meet. So, at the FBI, police, correction, courts, private contractors, they all have to meet this minimum requirement.
Yeah, I'll mention a kind of interesting fact about how to your ability to access this later. But yeah, you have to follow the security policy to be able to access the CJIS database. So next is what is considered criminal justice information. So one of the, I guess, misconceptions maybe is if you're, well, let's say from the digitization perspective. So we work with a lot of law enforcement agencies, and let's say we do a project with a police department, and we have different levels of security. It's just how we run our operations. There are technically four levels, but then one of them is L3, level 3 CJIS. But if a local police department says, hey, I have 500 boxes of personnel records, HR records, whatever it is, and we want to work with you, that's not necessarily considered a CJIS project unless the actual data is CJI. So it's not just you're working with a law enforcement agency, it's the actual data that's being handled. Just a little distinction between the types of projects. They don't all just fall into CJIS because you're working with a law enforcement agency or you are a law enforcement agency. It has to do with the data itself. So some of the requirements or what is required CJI is biometric data. So things like this, fingerprints, facial recognition, identity history. So any textual data that ties into this data, biographic data relating to a specific case about a person, and then property data related to a crime. So it has to fall into a specific, case and incident history. So information about criminal incidents. So CJI has to fall into this particular data. At least, if we're working with someone to be a CJIS project, it can't just be, hey, we have financial records for our department and so on and so forth. That's not technically criminal justice information. So it would be what we'd consider probably level 3 or level 2 data, but not level 3 CJIS because it's not CJI. Richard, any further
Yeah,
about
another
that?
way to look at what CJIS information is basically any information that law enforcement needs or collects to do their job. So another subset of CJIS is, I guess, another acronym would be CHRI, Criminal History Record Information. That's like, the files or intel in which these agency collects on individuals, like, I guess your gang files and the thing, those, anything that they run a history on and kept the history on, that's also considered CJIS information. So again, police, FBI, courts, corrections, it's a little bit of everything.
Hmm. Yeah, good extra note there. So we mentioned to be accessing the CJIS database, you have to follow security policy, what counts as CJI. Now we're not going to go into the entire security policy because it's quite extensive. You can actually, yeah, I believe you can just go online and find it. I think it's publicly available. But what it basically is a policy of what you have to do with how you handle CJI, how you train, process, etc., to be compliant with CJIS as to access that system. So one of the things here, like I said, you have to adhere to it, the security policy specifically, if you want access to the CJIS database. And some of the policy areas, I think there were like 15 or so, Richard. I think total 15 policy areas, as they call them.
Well,
A
yeah, that's a
couple
little more now, but
yeah, there's quite a few, but they each go over certain types of policies. You have policies, procedures, and whatnot that you have to follow to adhere to the security policy. So, such as Area 2 is security awareness training. 4, auditing accountability. So, how you have to audit your processes and how data is transmitted. You have to audit that accountability. Access control, so physical access, digital access, how people get to these records and how it's set up. Physical protection, so how the data is protected if it is CJI. Personnel security. So I just picked out a few of them so you can see kind of a general idea of what these policies are covering, or these policy areas are covering. So each one of those has to be adhered to. And like Richard said, it's 15 plus. I think there's at least 15. There might be 17 or 18 or something like that. But you have to follow those and make sure you're adhering to these policy guidelines if you want to be compliant and have access to CJIS. What else would you say about the security policy, Richard?
well, over the years, CJIS has also been aligning itself, and I believe at the end of last year, 2024, they completed what's called their security policy modernization alignment. So right now, the policy actually aligns itself with NIST 800-53 standard. So, the NIST 853 standard has like 20 policies, and I believe CJIS has 17 of those policies, and they add 2 of their own.
And Richard, just because I'll probably mess it up, but when he said NIST 800, no,
53.
NIST SP 800 TAC 53, I think it was, but NIST is National Institute of Standards and
Standards.
Technology.
Mhm.
Yeah, so National Institute of Standards, Technology, and other federal, a federal
It's
policy.
another federal agency which does rules and regulations, or I guess frameworks, security frameworks.
Which Richard and I were talking. So I'm actually the compliance officer as well, but Richard and I were talking about this recently because I think it was 10 or what 15 years ago now. We worked with a federal agency and they really helped us ramp up our security. So we kind of just got into this kind of coincidentally of really getting to high level security because we were working with a federal agency that required us to be NIST SP 800 TAC 53 compliant. So we were, before we even knew about CJIS, that's how we got, we were following some of the guidelines seemingly. So it wasn't that much of a jump to follow CJIS policy. So that's the security policy. It's a long document and you have to comply with it, follow the guidelines if you want access to the database, basically. Now, the importance of CJIS compliance. Why is it important to follow security policy? Well, you want access to the database. So if you're a local police department, you want access to the CJIS database. It's controlled by the FBI. You have to do these things. Interestingly, unless something new came up, there's not necessarily a penalty for not following CJIS. It's basically, if you want access to this, you must do this. So if this local police department says, hey, I'd like access to the database, like, great, you need to follow this, and maybe they're not doing something that falls under the FBI security policy, FBI says, no access, no soup for you. So it's not like they're going around getting audited and they're being penalized for not doing something necessarily. It's just, you don't get access to this national database, which could actually help you and your officers, detectives, and whatnot do their jobs and get this aggregated information. So unless something's different that I'm missing, Richard, that's correct, right?
But there are other penalties. There are many public, accounts that people have been fired for accessing and releasing CJIS information.
Oh, sure. Like if you blatantly, releasing the information, but just access to the database, you need to follow it to get access. That's kind of the gist of where I was going with that.
Correct. It is a requirement that all companies and agencies having access to CJIS data needs to comply with the CSP.
And of course, the importance of it is in general, the proper information handling. So if you're following the CJIS security policy and you are compliant with it, and you have access to CJIS, not only do you get that information that you can use for your own purposes, but it's just good and proper information handling and processing. There's a reason the FBI has this policy, because it's just a good way to do business, or I'm just using the term business for us or an agency, just how they do business, just handling their data properly. It's just anything you read about, you go, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. So it's just good policy to follow anyway, even if you're not accessing the database to get the information. Something I was going to mention, so I'll wait till maybe later on. So one of the aspects, let's talk about physical security. Now we'll kind of go into how does what are some things that specifically relate to BMI, because of course we're talking about CJIS and compliance and digitization. So why does this apply to a digital conversion company like BMI? Well, we want to work with law enforcement agencies, courts, whoever it is that have CJI. We want to be following this, so we can say we are CJIS compliant. We're following these policies. So if they require it, we can say, yes, we're doing that. Here, I can mention it here. Something interesting is BMI is not what you call, like, there's no CJIS certification for companies. Basically, one of our clients, county sheriff, they were going through, I believe, Richard, they were going through an audit of sorts because they wanted access to the CJIS database, which then the CJIS division, the FBI division, CJIS, said, well, your vendors that are handling this, they need to be complying as well. So then we kind of became sort of part of that audit, and we don't get certified, but we are what's called a CJIS listed vendor. So there's some sort of internal database that an agency that can handle CJI, or that wants to, as part of the CJIS database, they want to find someone to scan records that is CJIS listed. They can find us in that database because we're a CJIS listed vendor, because we pass these protocols, we follow security policy that our client was going through. It's kind of a weird way to get about it, but that's how we got into CJIS, is because our client said, hey, can you do this? And we did some things, and now we're CJIS listed.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that basically right,
yeah,
Richard?
basically we had to prove to this customer that we are CJIS compliant. So they did their due diligence, their audits, their paperwork trail to make sure that we meet all their requirements and the minimum requirements of the CJIS CSP.
And it's not a one-time thing. So actually, every one of our employees, it used to be, I think it's called, is it biennial when it's twice a year or every other year? So once we got listed, all employees at BMI had to do CJIS training and then take a test to pass it. And that was every 2 years. But then I think it was last year, the CJIS division, they changed it. So now it's every year there's training and a test. So every year we have to go through training and a test, all employees, to maintain our CJIS compliance. So that's something that's an ongoing process. Then I'll mention auditing later. So we'll get to that in a second. But so how it relates, circling back to how it relates to digitization and BMI and why it's important is we'll touch on a few things of how we protect data physically, digitally, and so forth. So a couple things for physical security. And this goes back to, policy area 9, I think it was, like physical protection, policy area, whatever, digital protection. So these all tie into some aspect, but employee entry. This is actually the front of our headquarters building in Sunnyvale, California, right in the middle of Silicon Valley. So employee entry. People can't just walk in our building. We have a number, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, 1, 2, 4 doors, 4 external doors. And they're all locked. And you need basically 2-factor authentication. You have to have a PIN code and then an employee badge to get in the building. So it's restricted access just to get inside the building. You can't just walk around and just someone off the street come in there and start wandering. It's a protected area physically. So any sort of CGI we have in the building is now separated from the public. Even within the building, this is one of our badges. It's flipped over so you can't see the person's information. But this is actually a door from the lobby area. So once you get in the building, let's say you go through the front, then there's another door to our, we just call the plant, the production area. So that's segregated as well. And only employees can get in there. So even if you're, let's say, a guest, you're visiting for something, maybe you're gonna do a site tour and you're inside the building, you're in the lobby, you can't just walk into the back and start looking around. There's another segregated door that you'd have to have a badge to get into to even allow you into the back. So it's another physical aspect, kind of like an onion where there are different layers within the building to protect data. Visitor protocols, we have everyone sign in. If they're a visitor, they have to have an escort in that plant, that production area. So the lobby area, they're allowed to be in the conference room and in the lobby in a chair, whatever it is. But in the production area, they have to have a BMI escort at all times. And then we have video surveillance inside and outside the building for 24/7 surveillance, recorded videos, monitoring, many different aspects. We go into physical security, but these are just a few things related to that tie back into protecting the data as part of the security policy. Richard, any additional aspects of this that are interesting to point out?
Yeah, part of physical security is making sure that the information is clearly identified, is marked, it's locked away properly and isolated. Now we also have physical, another part of physical security is making sure we have backup power, backup lighting, the correct fire suppression, the correct water, correct water monitoring, AC or temperature control environments. So it's quite a bit, it's
I'm just
security is all encompassing.
touching the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot more behind this. We just want to give you a few examples of, it's not like, hey, sure, you're compliant and you just have stuff and it's laying around, and no, it really does come down to following the policy. Because if you ever do get audited or checked and you're not doing this, then goodbye, there goes your listing or your access. So it's important to keep these up and follow these policies. Digital security, Richard's also part of the IT team, so he's very familiar with this as well. We do intrusion detection, regression testing. We segregate CJI from other data. I think that's probably one of the more interesting. Like, a lot of this does, what's the word? Maybe it applies to many different projects. So, like intrusion detection, we have a hosted platform that we do some pen testing on and whatnot. And so that may apply to other projects as well. So a lot of this does apply to just BMI as a whole, but something like this, we're segregating that data specifically from other projects because that's what's required by the security policy. So like Richard, can you give an example of how we do that, either maybe in DR or just general
Yeah,
processing?
part of the CJIS requirement is that you isolate processes or a type of data. So the CJIS infrastructure is actually a standalone infrastructure, which is separate from other data types. And so we don't commingle data types, is probably a better word for it.
And that would be on like just the general product side, but also on our the hosted platform, our digital real platform, which is CJIS-compliant hosting. So that's segregated as well. So we actually have we call it LE, law enforcement. So if you're, let's say, a sheriff's office and you have 2,000 rolls of microfilm that we scan, you want to use our hosted platform, digital real. We actually have it in our project process. The salesperson will designate this needs to go to digital real LE, which means DRLE, digital real law enforcement. So we know that's a CJIS project, and it needs to be, like Richard said, not commingled with other hosted clients, basically. Anything else on this, Richard?
Yeah, the other part with the digital security is that we also make sure that, hey, the USB are disabled, so no one can just plug in a USB thumb drive and take information. We also don't allow cameras or phones in our facility.
Yeah, an interesting thing for visitors, which we have, and we just had one when I was at the headquarters. We had a visitor, was it last week I was there? Anyway, and a lot of people bring this is in the main area, not the plant area, so they can have their laptops or their phones, whatever. But they're asking about internet, like, hey, can I how do I get onto your Wi-Fi? It's like, well, we don't have Wi-Fi. So I mean, you're thinking, yeah, it's 2025, you're a scanning company, you're a technology company, and all this. No Wi-Fi, just part of our security, saying that just not going to be, there's no reason for it. And it's just kind of funny when you get people looking at you like, you don't have Wi-Fi in your building? You said, nope. It's much easier for security, we just don't allow it. So just another little aspect of that that's kind of humorous. All right. Personnel security, absolutely critical, because you could have all the CJI, you can have all the processes, but it's people that are doing the work, they're dealing with the data. So background checks are important. I mentioned training and testing. Live scan is basically, let's say we're working in the police department, and they may request live scan checks for our employees, and that basically means that we will designate however many employees for this particular project we need, and they will go get additional background checks specifically for this live scan for that particular client. That's an aspect. So the normal background checks, every one of our employees is background checked, and then we do background checks on an ongoing basis of those same employees, because it's not just one and done. We do continual checking. But live scan is interesting because once you do live scan, it's not like, okay, that applies to all law enforcement agencies. It's the specific agency requesting this. So if you're working with Acme Police Department, say, hey, you're doing this project for me, I want your employees live scanned. We might have 10 employees as part of the project. They get the background check, live scan check. That's for Acme Police Department. Then Dogpatch Sheriff says, great, I have a project for you too. I want live scan. It may be, maybe it's the same 10 employees for, maybe it's the exact same project, or at least very similar. They still have to get live scan background checks for Dogpatch. So it's a little extra work, but it's something that if it's requested by the agency, we're happy to do it. And it's just kind of a little nuance that not a lot of people know about. Password enforcement, of course, Richie could go into that for quite a few, probably quite a few minutes on what we have to do for password enforcement, how we track those, how we enforce them. And then least privilege access, that basically means don't give people more than they need. It's like, what's the minimum amount of information someone needs? That's their level of access. And then prove to me why they would need any more than that. So those are a few items around personnel security to limit availability of data, limit access to certain areas. Even like the physical security, going back to the badging and whatnot. There are many smaller rooms in our Sunnyvale headquarters where only certain employees can access. So it's not just anyone can go anywhere. Certain rooms only a few individuals can get into. It just goes back into that least privilege. If you don't need to be there, you don't need access. There's no reason for it. And that's just how we run our operations. Richard, anything else on personnel security that you want to go over?
Yeah, I think the biggest differentiator is that we are actually listed again as a CJIS vendor. And being a CJIS vendor, we actually take the same training as all the police, sheriffs, people do. So I think that's a very big deal.
Yeah, not a lot of people know or heard of CJIS. I'm in an industry group, companies like mine across the company or across the country, excuse me. And someone, one of the newer members, it was about a year ago, he brought up CJIS, and I said, yeah, we're deep into that. And I'd say 90% of this group was saying, huh? Like, what's that? So it's not as, we're talking about it. It's not as familiar as you may think for people that work with law enforcement agencies. So that goes back to the compliance with, okay, you don't do this, you don't get access. So you can still work with a law enforcement agency if you're not a CJIS listed vendor. It's just that kind of differentiator of, okay, here's company A that is CJIS listed, here's company B it's not, and you're a law enforcement agency. Who do you think would probably be the better choice? Most likely the one that's a CJIS listed vendor, because they're following these things. Doesn't mean the other people are bad, it's just they may not be doing as much as they potentially could be. It's kind of a sort of an opinion thing, but it's up to our clients or our the folks that contact us to really make the last decision. But it's definitely a differentiator. So we talked about auditing. Like, yeah, we could say we do these things, but how do you check that? Now, the SOC 2 Type 2 audit for systems and operations controls, Type 2 is where they actually verify over a time period. So you have a what do you call it? Basically an audit period. So it's a full year, and during that year, auditors will come on site to BMI and say, great, you say you're doing this, show me, like prove it. Okay, and it's over an entire year. So they say any time frame, any day or week or month within that year, they say, I'm just gonna choose a random day. How about May 1st? You said, show me that you were following this protocol on this day, or give me the reports from that system for this. Or okay, you hired someone at that time, show me they went through the onboarding process and they got background checked. So we do a BMI internal audit. I think Richard was on that webinar when we did that one too, when we did the internal audit. So we do our own, we're going through it now, our own audit. We audit ourselves, but it's kind of like grading your own homework. It's great that we do it. It helps us prepare for this audit. We're a third party. Kirkpatrick Price is the agency we work with. A third party comes on and they verify, saying BMI says they're doing this. We checked it, they are doing it, and we have proof that they're doing it. And it's an annual audit and an annual report. So every year we do the audit, every year we get a report, and a lot of times clients or soon-to-be clients will ask for our SOC 2 report, which we can provide with an NDA. And it's like, we have the normal one, which is about 180 pages, and the privacy report, which is another 150 pages. They're very long reports, very detailed, but we can provide those because we do these audits every year. So they're not necessarily doing a CJIS specific audit, but the things that we're doing for CJIS do fall into many of the standard operations we do anyway. So we are getting audited and verified, and we're being verified for what we say we're doing to protect data, process data, hire and onboard personnel, terminations, hosting, all those different aspects of just the company. It's all audited. Richard was the lead on this, the most recent audit, which was about 6 months ago. So you could probably speak to a little bit more about this and why it's important related to CJIS as well.
Yeah, many of the frameworks are very overlapping. So, so there are a lot of commonalities in all these requirements. And one of the basic requirements is that we always have to monitor security. And part of monitoring the security is to getting audited either internally or doing third-party verification. And so that's where our SOC 2 comes in which we're actually getting third-party audited. So yeah, compliance is compliance, but the second aspect is, what does it really mean to be secure? And basically, that's how you do your business. And having a SOC 2 audit or having a third-party audit us means, it's another notch up that, hey, we're really serious about our security.
Yes, absolutely. We've been doing it for about, I think we did our first SOC 2 type 1. So a type 1 audit is where they do a point in time, whereas a SOC 2 is a continual, like the whole year. We did our first SOC 2 type 1. It was like 2018 or 19. And then we did our first SOC 2 actually in 2020. And then we've been doing them ever since. So it's not something you can just jump into. Because of that, we mentioned that agency where we were NIST compliant. Because of that, we were being, again, because of our clients, we were actually being kind of audited by Kirkpatrick Price, the CPA firm that does the SOC 2s, because our client was being audited. So they were actually visiting us and they looked around and they were reviewing everything we do and how we do it and said, you're very close to this. You should just get SOC 2. And we thought, okay, we didn't even realize we were that deep into security. So it's just another one of those things that having certain clients has helped us get these security aspects in place. So NIST, SOC 2, CJIS, all those. I know it's all tying back to CJIS, but the SOC 2 is important because it's verifying we are doing what we say we're doing. We can provide proof and reports that someone has checked that. Okay, that wraps up the presentation. So I'll leave it open for questions. I don't think I saw any questions. There's nothing in the chat since we started. So I'll give it, well, if you have a question, throw it in there. I'm not just going to leave it here for a minute and just wait. I have one more slide, I believe. So if you think of a question, go ahead and throw it in there. I'll answer it. If not, that's fine. You can always reach out to us after, which you can contact me directly using that email there. Something I recommend you doing, if you have your cell phone on you, turn on the photo, the camera. If you hover over this QR code and click the URL that pops up, that'll take you to the newsletter sign up on our website. We send out an email every other Tuesday, which basically it gives you any of our new blogs, new videos, because we have a YouTube channel as well with videos and shorts and whatnot, and recorded webinars. This will go there. And it'll also include webinars that are upcoming. So if you're on our newsletter, every other week, you'll get an email every other Tuesday, and you'll just see new content and upcoming events. Or if you have a project that you're interested in, like you're like, yeah, I have 5,000 boxes, 100 boxes, 300 rolls, whatever it is, you can actually hover over this. It takes you to our price estimator. You can just click along, type in some information, and then it'll give you kind of a high level estimate of what your project could be. Of course, we need to discuss specifics with you, but it's kind of a great way to get a general idea of what a project could cost to digitize. So check that out if you're interested in either of those. Do not see any questions. So that wraps it up. Thank you for joining today. Thank you for watching. Again, I'll send out an email tomorrow with the link to our YouTube channel where this is going to be posted. So thanks for being here. And Richard, thank you for joining. I appreciate it and hope to see some folks on the next webinar.